After my son's fraud destroyed my company and reputation, I ended up waitressing. One day, a wealthy businessman joked, "Financial advice, waitress." He didn't know who I used to be. I looked at his papers. "You'll be bankrupt in 6 months." He laughed it off. Next day, 6 a.m. sharp, he was at my door. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started. 2 years ago, I was Catherine Wells, senior partner at Wells & Associates Financial Consulting. I had corner offices in downtown Chicago, managed portfolios worth over $50 million, and drove a BMW that cost more than most people's annual salary. My clients included tech entrepreneurs, real estate moguls, and old money families who trusted me with their generational wealth. Then my son Michael decided to play Gordon Gekko with client funds. The FBI raid happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I was reviewing quarterly reports when agents in navy jackets stormed through our mahogany doors like they owned the place, which, legally speaking, they did once they slapped those seizure notices on everything from my coffee mug to my diplomas. Michael had been forging my signature for 8 months, moving money between accounts like he was playing 3-card Monte with people's retirement funds. $2.7 million gone, along with my reputation, my license, and my sanity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 30 years teaching people how to spot financial red flags, and my own son had been waving them right under my nose. The media had a field day. Financial advisor's son bilks clients in Ponzi scheme. My name was attached to every headline, even though I was victim number 1. The lawsuits came next. Civil suits from clients who lost their savings, criminal proceedings that cleared me legally but destroyed me professionally. Even vindicated, nobody wanted financial advice from the woman whose own family had robbed them blind. By Christmas, I was 68 years old with $47 in my checking account and a studio apartment in a neighborhood where sirens were the dominant musical genre. That's when I saw the help wanted sign at Murphy's Diner. Murphy's Diner wasn't exactly what you'd call fine dining. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through old gym socks. The vinyl booths had more cracks than a Chicago sidewalk in February, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look like they were suffering from some exotic disease. But it paid cash daily, didn't require references, and the owner, Tommy Murphy, didn't care that I'd been plastered across the financial pages for all the wrong reasons. "You ever waitress before?" Tommy asked during my interview, which consisted of him looking me up and down while wiping his hands on a stained apron. "I've been serving people for 30 years, I said. It wasn't technically a lie. The job was harder than managing million-dollar portfolios, if you can believe that. At least hedge fund managers said please when they were being condescending. The breakfast crowd at Murphy's treated waitresses like walking coffee dispensers with the unfortunate side effect of having opinions. But I adapted. I had to. The tips paid for my insulin, the shifts kept me busy enough to avoid thinking about how spectacularly my life had imploded, and the work was honest in a way that made me feel clean again. 3 months in, I'd developed what Tommy generously called interpersonal skills, and what I called the ability to smile while fantasizing about poisoning someone's coffee. That's when Harrison Blackwell walked into my life. It was a Thursday morning in March. The kind of day when Chicago couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or spring, so it chose to be miserable instead. The breakfast rush was winding down when he strolled through the door like he owned not just the diner, but the entire city block. Designer suit, Italian leather shoes, and the kind of watch that cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. He was probably in his mid-50s, with silver-gray hair and the confident bearing of a man who'd never heard the word no applied to anything he wanted. He settled into booth 7, pulled out his phone, and immediately began conducting what sounded like a hostile takeover via speakerphone, because apparently common courtesy was for people who couldn't afford $1,000 suits. "Excuse me," I said, approaching his table with my best customer service smile. "I'm going to need you to lower your voice or take that call outside. Other customers are trying to enjoy their breakfast." Harrison Blackwell looked up at me like I'd suggested he donate a kidney to charity. His pale blue eyes did a quick assessment, categorizing me somewhere between furniture and minor inconvenience. "I'll have coffee, black, and whatever passes for eggs Benedict in this establishment," he said. never actually pausing his phone conversation about crushing some competitor's quarterly projections. I poured his coffee, noting that his papers were spread across the table like he was conducting board meetings at the United Nations. Financial statements, merger documents, acquisition proposals. My trained eye couldn't help but spot familiar warning signs in the scattered documents, old habits dying hard as concrete. 20 minutes later, he was still talking, now discussing some real estate deal in Miami with enough volume to wake the dead. The other customers were shooting dirty looks, and Tommy was giving me the "handle this or you're fired" stare from behind the counter. "Sir," I tried again. "I really need you to—" "Hold on," he said into the phone, then looked at me with the expression of a man addressing a particularly slow child. "Do you understand that this call is worth more than you'll make in your entire lifetime?" The diner went quiet. Even the coffee pot stopped percolating, like it was holding its breath waiting for what came next. I looked down at the papers scattered across his table. Blackwell Enterprises, real estate acquisitions, tech startup investments. And right there, visible in the scattered documents, the kind of leverage patterns and cash flow indicators that had kept me awake at night when I saw them in other portfolios. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying just loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "I understand that you're about to lose everything you think you own." He blinked, clearly not expecting his waitress to have opinions about his business empire. "I beg your pardon? Those leverage ratios look dangerous. Your cash flow structure appears unstable, and from what I can see, you're carrying more debt than your asset base can reasonably support." The silence in the diner was now complete. Harrison Blackwell stared at me like I'd started speaking ancient Greek. "I'm sorry," Harrison said, his voice dripping with condescension, "but I don't recall asking for financial advice from the waitress." The words hit the diner like a slap. A few customers chuckled, the uncomfortable kind of laughter that happens when someone with power humiliates someone without it. Tommy's face went red, but he didn't intervene. Not for a waitress challenging a customer who probably spent more on lunch than Murphy's made in a week. I felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up my neck, the same feeling I'd had during every news interview, every courtroom appearance, every moment when people looked at me like I was some kind of con artist instead of the victim of one. But then I looked down at those papers again, at the patterns that didn't lie, even when everything else did. "You're right," I said, my voice steady as winter. "You didn't ask, but if you had, I'd tell you to get a full audit of your financial structure before it's too late. What I can see from here suggests you're heading for serious trouble." Harrison's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "Is that so? And what exactly qualifies you to make such bold predictions about my business?" "Experience," I said simply. "I've seen enough balance sheets to recognize the warning signs, even from scattered documents on a diner table." The color started to drain from his face. "That's quite enough," he said, standing abruptly and gathering his papers. "I don't know where you think you learned to read financial statements, but—" "Catherine Wells," I said, quietly. He froze. "Wells and Associates Financial Consulting. I managed portfolios for 30 years before my son destroyed my company. I've seen more financial disasters than you've had board meetings, and yours has all the classic warning signs." Harrison stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'd need to see your full financials to be certain," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee with hands that weren't shaking anymore. "But if you want a professional opinion, I'll be here tomorrow." He left without paying for his eggs Benedict. The next morning came gray and drizzling. Typical Chicago spring weather that couldn't decide if it wanted to be depressing or just consistently annoying. I was opening Murphy's at 6 a.m., same as every Thursday, when I heard the knock on the glass door. Harrison Blackwell stood outside in the rain, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His designer suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and he was clutching a manila folder against his chest like it contained the secrets of the universe. I unlocked the door, noting that his Italian leather shoes were soaked through. "We're not open for another hour," I said. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice hoarse, "about what you said yesterday." I stepped aside to let him in, flipping on the lights and starting the coffee machine out of habit. The diner felt different at this hour, quieter, more honest somehow. like secrets were easier to tell before the rest of the world woke up. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded, sliding into the same booth he'd occupied yesterday. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened the folder and spread papers across the table. "I spent all night going through my books," he said. "Had my accountant prepare summary reports, pulled records going back 2 years. I poured his coffee, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "And? You were right." The words came out like he was confessing to murder. "About the warning signs, the leverage problems, all of it. My accountant says we have maybe 4 months before the creditors start circling." I sat down across from him, curious despite myself. In my old life, clients came to me before they reached the cliff edge, not after they'd already started falling. "How did you see it so quickly?" he asked. "My own financial team didn't catch what you spotted in 20 minutes. Your financial team gets paid to tell you what you want to hear," I said, sipping my coffee. "I don't." Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. Brutal honesty from the woman I insulted in front of a room full of strangers. "There's some irony for you." "There usually is." He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes intense. "I need your help, Catherine. I don't know what that looks like or what it costs, but I need someone who can see through the bullshit and tell me if there's a way out of this mess." "I'm a waitress," I reminded him. "You're Catherine Wells," he said, "and despite everything that happened, you were one of the best financial minds in Chicago before your son destroyed your company." I felt something stir in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Professional pride, maybe? Or just the simple pleasure of being recognized for something other than my son's crimes. "What exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to save my company." "Save your company?" I repeated, making sure I'd heard him correctly. "Mr. Blackwell, I serve coffee and take orders for eggs. I haven't touched a financial consulting project in 2 years, and when I did, it ended with FBI raids and criminal investigations. Because your son was a thief," Harrison said bluntly. "Not because you were incompetent." The words hung in the air between us. It was the first time in 2 years that anyone had made that distinction without being paid to represent me legally. "Besides," he continued, "what do you have to lose? You're working at a diner in a neighborhood where the sirens play lullabies. I'm offering you a chance to do what you were born to do. And if I can't fix it? If your company collapses anyway?" Harrison shrugged. "Then at least I'll go down knowing I tried everything, including swallowing my pride and asking a waitress for help." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or desperation. Both were there, but underneath was something else. Respect, maybe, or just the recognition that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "I'd need to do this legally," I said slowly. "I maintained my Series 66 license and kept my LLC active. Old habits. Never thought I'd need them again." "You still have your credentials?" Financial advising was my life for 30 years. Even after everything collapsed, I couldn't quite let go completely. Harrison's expression shifted to something approaching relief. "Then we can do this properly." "I'd need complete access," I continued. "Every bank statement, every loan document, every contract and agreement. No secrets, no off-limits files. Done. I'd need authority to make recommendations. If I say restructure something, you consider it seriously. If I say liquidate an asset, you evaluate it." "Understood. And I'd need my old consulting rate," I said, naming a figure that made his eyebrows rise. "Plus equity if we turn this around. If I save your company, I own part of it." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, calculating risks and rewards with the desperation of a drowning man being offered a life preserver that might be made of concrete. "Agreed," he said finally. "But I have one condition, which is, we position this as bringing in independent strategic consulting, professional turnaround expertise. My board doesn't need to know you've been working at Murphy's." I almost laughed. From senior partner to waitress to independent consultant. At least this trajectory was pointing upward again. "Ashamed to admit you found your consultant in a diner. Ashamed to admit I need outside help at all," he corrected. "My business reputation is hanging by a thread." Fair enough. In the corporate world, admitting weakness was like chumming shark-infested waters. "When do we start?" I asked. "How about now?" Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed. "James? It's Harrison. I need you to prepare a complete financial package for Wells Strategic Consulting. Everything. Yes, everything. Have it ready by noon. He hung up and looked at me with something approaching hope. "Welcome back to the game, Catherine Wells." I refilled his coffee cup, my hands steady for the first time in months. Let's see if I remember how to play. Harrison's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Blackwell Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per square foot than most people's houses. When his assistant, James, handed me the comprehensive financial files, I felt like an archaeologist discovering a lost civilization. "Mr. Blackwell is in meetings until 3, James said, his tone suggesting that independent consultants who used to be waitresses ranked somewhere below office furniture in his hierarchy of respect. "Perfect," I said, settling into the conference room with my coffee. I work better without an audience. 3 hours later, I understood why Harrison looked like a man facing his own execution. Blackwell Enterprises wasn't just bleeding money. It was hemorrhaging like a trauma patient in an emergency room. The Miami real estate project alone was a financial catastrophe that made the Titanic look like a minor navigation error. But buried in the chaos, I found something interesting. A pattern of investments that didn't quite fit the rest of Harrison's portfolio. Tech startups, biomedical research, clean energy projects, all showing modest but steady returns while his flashier ventures crumbled. When Harrison returned from his meetings, he found me reorganizing his entire financial structure on the whiteboard like I was planning a military campaign. "How bad is it?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Worse than you thought," I said, capping my marker, "but not as hopeless as it looks." I walked him through the analysis, explaining how his ego had led him to chase high-profile deals while ignoring the solid, unsexy investments that were actually making money. His face grew paler with each revelation. "So what you're telling me," he said slowly, "is that I'm an idiot. I'm telling you that you're a successful businessman who started believing his own press releases," I corrected. "There's a difference, though the end result is remarkably similar." Harrison laughed despite himself. "Brutal honesty strikes again. You wanted someone who wouldn't blow sunshine up your assets," I reminded him. "I'm delivering as advertised." Over the next week, I developed a rescue plan that was surgical in its precision. Sell the Miami disaster to cut losses, liquidate 3 underperforming subsidiaries, and double down on the quiet winners that nobody was paying attention to. It would mean swallowing Harrison's pride and admitting failure publicly, but it would save the company. "The board will want detailed justification," Harrison said when I presented the proposal. "These are projects I've been promoting for 2 years. Then we'll give them detailed justification," I said. "Professional analysis, market data, the works. This isn't about pride anymore. Harrison, it's about survival." The first test came during a board meeting on a rainy Thursday. I sat at the conference table as Wells Strategic Consulting, officially presenting the turnaround strategy to 11 skeptical faces. "This is madness," declared Marcus Webb, the board chairman who'd been questioning Harrison's leadership for months. "You're proposing we abandon our most high-profile investments." "I'm proposing we abandon our most expensive mistakes," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "The data supports strategic divestiture of underperforming assets and reallocation to profitable sectors." I walked them through the numbers, showing how the Miami project was hemorrhaging cash with no realistic path to profitability, while the overlooked tech investments were generating consistent returns. The vote was close, 5 in favor, 4 against, with 2 abstentions. But it passed. As the board members filed out, Webb approached Harrison with the expression of a man who smelled blood in the water. "Bringing in outside consultants reeks of desperation, Harrison," he said quietly. "The investors are asking questions. How long before they lose confidence entirely?" "As long as it takes to turn this company around," Harrison replied. After Webb left, Harrison slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. "He's planning something," I observed. "I know," Harrison said. "The question is whether we can save the company before he makes his move." "We will," I said, surprised by my own conviction. "But we need to move fast." Over the next 2 weeks, I implemented the restructuring plan with the precision of a surgeon. The Miami property sold to a developer who specialized in distressed assets. The 3 underperforming subsidiaries were liquidated, with proceeds redirected to debt reduction. The profitable tech investments received additional funding. Harrison's company began showing signs of recovery, but Webb's opposition grew more vocal. He questioned every decision, demanded additional board meetings, and made it clear he was building a case for Harrison's removal. "He's not just trying to remove you," I told Harrison one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. "He's positioning himself for a takeover." "Based on what?" "Pattern recognition. I've seen it before. Board chairman undermines CEO, creates crisis of confidence, then swoops in to save the company. Usually involves acquiring additional shares at discount prices during the chaos." Harrison stared at the financial reports spread across his desk. "So what do? We do what we've been doing. Save the company despite his interference. Make our success so obvious that the board has no choice but to support you." But I had a feeling Webb wasn't going to make it that easy. 3 weeks into our partnership, I was working late in Harrison's office when I found the photograph tucked inside a loan agreement from 1987. It was a family photo. Harrison, maybe 20 years younger, with his arm around a woman with dark hair and warm eyes. 2 small children sat at their feet, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 and 7. "My family," Harrison said from the doorway, startling me. "Former family, I should say." I held up the photograph. "Divorce? Death," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from me. "Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light when the kids were 8 and 10. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Harrison, I'm so sorry. It was 15 years ago," he said, but his voice carried the weight of someone who'd never quite recovered. "Sarah always said I worked too much, that I was building an empire for a family that never got to see me. After they died, work was all I had left." Suddenly, his desperate need to save the company made perfect sense. It wasn't about money or ego. It was about preserving the only thing that gave his life meaning. "Is that why you've been making increasingly risky investments?" I asked gently. "Because the safe choices remind you of what you lost?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "You're quite the psychologist, along with being a financial wizard." "I'm a mother," I said. "I understand loving someone so much that losing them breaks something inside you. Your son. My son broke something different," I said. "Trust mostly, but love? That's harder to kill." We worked in comfortable silence after that. Both of us focused on numbers that represented more than profit and loss. They represented hope, redemption, and the possibility that broken things could be repaired. The company's recovery was becoming undeniable. Revenue was stabilizing, debt payments were on schedule, and the profitable investments were exceeding projections. But Webb's campaign against Harrison intensified. "He's calling for another board meeting," Harrison said, reading an email. "Emergency session to discuss ongoing concerns about leadership decisions." "Let him," I said. "We have the numbers on our side now." At midnight, Harrison called for a car to take me home. As I gathered my papers, he touched my arm gently. "Catherine," he said, "thank you. Not just for the financial advice, for understanding." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We still have a company to save, and something tells me Webb's not finished with us." The moment I'd been dreading arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. I was reviewing quarterly projections when James burst into the conference room with panic in his eyes. "Ms. Wells," he said, "there are FBI agents in the lobby asking for you." My blood turned to ice water. After 2 years, I'd thought the investigations were finally over. But apparently, someone had connected Catherine Wells, the consultant, to Catherine Wells from the financial scandal. "Do they have a warrant?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "I don't know. Mr. Blackwell is handling it, but they're insisting on speaking with you." I walked to Harrison's office with the resignation of someone approaching the gallows. Through the glass walls, I could see 2 agents in dark suits, their faces professionally neutral. "Ms. Wells," the older agent said when I entered. "I'm Agent Martinez. This is Agent Foster. We need to discuss your involvement in an ongoing investigation." "What investigation?" I asked. "Corporate espionage and financial fraud. We believe you may have information relevant to our case." Relief flooded through me. They wanted information, not to arrest me. "Your son Michael has been cooperating with our investigation," Agent Foster continued. "He's provided information about a conspiracy involving multiple financial firms, including your former company." "A conspiracy?" "According to Michael's statement, someone approached him 3 years ago with a proposal to destabilize certain financial consulting firms. The goal was to acquire their client lists and assets at discount prices. The room spun slightly. Someone approached Michael before the fraud began. A board member of a major corporation who specializes in acquiring distressed companies. Michael claims this person provided specific instructions on how to make the fraud look like a family business gone wrong. Harrison's face went white. Are you saying Catherine was specifically targeted? We believe so, yes. The fraud wasn't random. It was orchestrated to destroy Wells and Associates so the assets could be acquired cheaply. Agent Martinez pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk. Marcus Webb, in what appeared to be a restaurant, sitting across from a younger man I recognized as my son. Do you recognize this man, Ms. Wells? I stared at the photograph, feeling pieces click into place with sickening clarity. That's Marcus Webb. He's on Mr. Blackwell's board of directors. Mr. Webb has been under surveillance for 6 months, Agent Foster said. We believe he's been using this method to acquire multiple companies, create financial chaos, then swoop in to purchase assets at pennies on the dollar. Harrison stood abruptly and walked to the window. That's why he's been trying to remove me. If Blackwell Enterprises fails, he can acquire it himself. Exactly. But with Ms. Wells helping to turn the company around, his plan is failing, which is why we need your help. What kind of help? I asked. We need you to attend tomorrow's board meeting, Agent Martinez said, wearing a wire. The emergency board meeting Webb had called for the next afternoon was standing room only. Webb arrived with his alliance of co-conspirators, clearly expecting to deliver the killing blow to Harrison's leadership. The wire I wore felt like a lead weight against my chest, but Agent Martinez's voice in my earpiece was steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, Webb began, standing at the head of the conference table. We're here to discuss the continued financial instability of this company and the need for new leadership. He launched into a prepared speech about Harrison's poor judgment, questionable consulting choices, and the need for immediate change. But I noticed his eyes kept darting to me, as if he recognized something familiar but couldn't quite place it. The numbers don't support your concerns, Marcus, I said when he finished. Blackwell Enterprises has shown consistent improvement over the past 2 months. Revenue is stabilizing, debt is being reduced, and profitable sectors are expanding. Webb's face darkened. And who exactly are you to make such assessments? Wells Strategic Consulting appears to have materialized out of nowhere. Catherine Wells, former senior partner at Wells and Associates Financial Consulting, I said, standing slowly. You might remember my company. You helped destroy it 3 years ago. The room went dead silent. Webb's face went through several color changes before settling on a pale gray. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Agent Martinez from the FBI might disagree, I said, nodding toward the door. As if summoned by my words, the conference room doors opened and federal agents entered. Marcus Webb, Agent Martinez said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate espionage, and racketeering. In the chaos that followed, as Webb was led away in handcuffs and several board members scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, Harrison and I stood together by the windows. The wire recording had captured everything. Webb's admission that he'd orchestrated multiple company failures, his plan to acquire Blackwell Enterprises, and enough evidence to connect him to the destruction of my original company. So, Harrison said quietly, what happens now? Now we rebuild, I said. Your company, my reputation, everything they tried to destroy. Together? I looked at this man who had insulted me as a waitress and then trusted me to save everything he valued, who had stood by me when the FBI came calling and never questioned my integrity. Together, I agreed. 6 months later, Blackwell Enterprises was thriving under new leadership, and Catherine Wells was once again a name associated with financial excellence rather than scandal. The insurance settlement from Webb's crimes had restored most of my original clients' losses, and Wells Strategic Consulting had a waiting list of corporations seeking turnaround expertise. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay down when someone tries to destroy you. And sometimes the most unlikely partnerships become the strongest foundations for rebuilding everything you thought you'd lost forever. At 70 years old, I'd learned that it's never too late to fight back, and success tastes sweetest when it comes after someone has tried their best to break you. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.